complete history of classical music, before there were symphonies, before there were concert halls, before there was even written language, there was sound. Deep in the mists of time, tens of thousands of years ago, our ancestors were already shaping the air around them in ways we're only beginning to understand. And in those earliest stirrings of human expression, we find the very first whispers of what would one day become the music we know today. Let us begin at the beginning, in the silence before music, and listen for those first ancient voices. Long before the first note was ever written down, before any composer put pen to paper, the human body itself was evolving into an instrument. Around 60,000 years ago, both Neanderthals and early humans possessed something remarkable, a fully descended hyoid bone. This small, horseshoe-shaped bone in the throat is the anchor point for the muscles that control our voice. Its position in our ancient relatives tells us something profound. They had the anatomy for complex sound making. They could modulate pitch, create varied tones, perhaps even sing in ways we might recognize today. In the deep caves of prehistoric Europe, in the savannas of Africa, voices rose and fell in patterns lost to time. What did they sound like? We'll never know for certain. But the potential was there, waiting in the darkness, ready to become music. But sound making in those ancient times wasn't what we might think of as music today. It wasn't art for art's sake, not yet. Early humans crafted whistles from hollow bones, their breath transformed into piercing calls that could travel across valleys. They spun bull roarers, flat pieces of wood on cords that, when whirled overhead, produced an eerie, otherworldly roar that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. They scraped notched bones and sticks together, creating rhythmic rasps that might have accompanied ritual or dance. And they discovered something else, something wonderful. They found that the world around them could make music too. A struck cave wall could boom like a drum. A stalagmite, when tapped, could ring like a bell. The environment itself became their first orchestra, responding to their touch with tones that resonated through stone chambers and open air alike. Speaking of caves, some of the most fascinating discoveries in prehistoric sound come from deep underground. Archaeologists studying Paleolithic cave paintings have noticed something curious. Many of the most elaborate images, the paintings of bison and horses, of hands and mysterious symbols, appear in locations with remarkable acoustic properties. The walls echo. The chambers resonate. Some researchers have found what they call resonance marks, deliberate markings in places where the cave itself amplifies sound most dramatically. Imagine standing in total darkness, striking a wall, and hearing your rhythm bounce back to you, transformed by the stone into something richer, deeper. These early humans weren't just painting on cave walls. They were playing the cave itself like an enormous instrument. They understood, perhaps intuitively, that space and sound were connected, that certain places made certain sounds come alive in magical ways. Why did they do this? Why make these sounds at all? The answer, as best we can tell, has little to do with entertainment. Music in those times likely served deeper purposes. It was ritual, accompanying ceremonies we can only guess at, marking transitions, honoring forces beyond human understanding. It was cohesion, binding communities together through shared rhythms and collective participation. It was communication, conveying meaning across distances or in ways that speech could not. And it was coordination, helping groups of people move together, hunt together, work together in synchronized harmony. Music wasn't a luxury or a pastime. It was woven into the fabric of survival itself, as essential as fire or stone tools. In the beginning, music had a job to do. And then, somewhere around 40,000 years ago, something extraordinary happened. Humans began to craft instruments that could produce melody. In the caves of what is now Germany, archaeologists discovered something breathtaking: flutes carved from bird bone and mammoth ivory. The most famous of these is the Hohle flute, a delicate tube of vulture bone with carefully drilled finger holes. Found in a cave in the Swabian Alps, it still works. When researchers gently blow into it, notes emerge, clear, haunting tones that have been silent for 400 centuries. This isn't just noise anymore. This is pitch. This is melody. This is music as we would recognize it, preserved in bone, waiting patiently in the earth for someone to find it and make it sing again. And there may be something even older. On a mountainside in Slovenia, in a cave called Gymnopédie, researchers found what might be a Neanderthal flute, a piece of cave bear femur with holes that seem too perfectly aligned to be random. The dating suggests it could be over 50,000 years old. The debate continues. Some scientists believe it's merely bone fragments damaged by animal teeth. Others see intentional craftsmanship, a genuine instrument made by our evolutionary cousins. Whether or not the Gymnopédie bone is truly a flute, it holds symbolic power. It reminds us that the urge to make music might be older than our species, that the desire to transform breath into sound might be written into the very essence of what it means to be human, or near human. The mystery remains, hovering in that space between evidence and imagination. What's remarkable about these ancient flutes is how sophisticated they already were. These weren't crude experiments. The Hohle flute, and others like it, feature precisely placed finger holes and carefully shaped tubes. The principles at work are nearly identical to those of a modern flute. Someone 40,000 years ago understood that covering and uncovering holes would change the pitch. They knew how to shape a tube to make it resonant. They grasped the physics of breath and vibration, even if they couldn't articulate it in scientific terms. This wasn't primitive fumbling toward music. This was craftsmanship, passed down through generations, refined and perfected. By the time these instruments were made, the art of flute making was already old. How much older, we may never know. The locations where these flutes were found tell their own story. Many come from caves with natural acoustics, spaces where sound carries and echoes in particular ways. This wasn't accidental. Our ancestors were choosing where to play, just as carefully as they chose what to play. They understood that music doesn't exist in a vacuum. It lives in space, shaped by the walls around it, the air between performer and listener. They were thinking about sound in 3 dimensions, aware of how a note would bloom and fade in the cathedral-like chambers of their caves. This is acoustic awareness, deliberate and intentional, showing a sophistication we might not expect from people we sometimes think of as primitive. And they weren't playing alone. Archaeological sites often reveal flutes alongside percussion instruments, drums made from skin stretched over frames, stones struck together, bones used as clappers. The picture that emerges is one of ensembles, of people making music together. One person played the flute, while another kept the rhythm. Perhaps voices joined in, rising and falling in patterns that complemented the instruments. This is ensemble thinking, the same basic concept that would, tens of thousands of years later, give us string quartets and symphony orchestras. Even then, in the flickering firelight of prehistoric caves, humans understood that music is most powerful when shared, when individual sounds weave together into something larger than themselves. So what can we say about these earliest expressions of music? They were communal, bringing people together in shared experience. They were ritual, serving purposes beyond mere pleasure, connecting humans to something greater than themselves. And they were spatial, deeply aware of environment, of acoustics, of the way sound moves through the world. Music, from its very beginning, was never just sound. It was connection. It was meaning. It was the human spirit reaching out through time. And it all started here, in the darkness, with a bone flute and a breath, 40,000 years ago. We move forward now, thousands of years in a single breath, from the firelit caves of our ancestors to the stone halls of medieval Europe. The world has changed. Empires have risen and fallen. Languages have been born. And music has found a new home. Between the 8th and 10th centuries, in monasteries and cathedrals across Western Europe, something profound was taking shape. A new kind of music was emerging, sacred, unified, deliberate. It would come to be known as Gregorian chant, and it would lay the foundation for everything that followed. This is where the story of Western classical music truly begins. Not with a bold, dramatic flourish, but with a single, sustained voice, rising through incense and candlelight, calling to the divine. Gregorian chant developed slowly, gradually, over generations. It wasn't invented in a moment of inspiration. Instead, it grew from the merging of two distinct traditions, the Roman chant of Italy and the Frankish chant of what is now France and Germany. The Church, in its effort to unify worship across vast territories, sought to create a single, standardized form of sacred music. Different regions had different melodies, different ways of singing the liturgy. This diversity was seen as a problem. The solution was to blend these traditions into one coherent system, a unified musical language for all of Christendom. And so, through decades of careful refinement, Gregorian chant was born, a music of consensus, of order, of spiritual authority. The name itself, Gregorian, comes from Pope Gregory I, who lived in the late 6th and early 7th centuries. Legend says that Gregory received these melodies directly from the Holy Spirit, often depicted as a dove whispering into his ear while he wrote them down. It's a beautiful image, but it's not quite historically accurate. Gregory didn't invent this music. He may have organized some aspects of liturgical practice, but the chant that bears his name developed centuries after his death. His name became attached to it as a symbol, a way of giving divine authority and legitimacy to this new unified system. To call it Gregorian was to say, this is not merely human invention. This is sacred. This is eternal. This is how worship should sound. And what did it sound like? Gregorian chant is monophonic, meaning it consists of a single melodic line with no harmony. There are no chords, no accompanying voices, singing different notes simultaneously. Just one pure thread of melody, carried by multiple voices singing in unison. Imagine a group of monks standing in a dim chapel, their voices blending into one continuous sound. No individual stands out. The melody seems to come from the group itself, from the very stones of the building, from the air between earth and heaven. This simplicity is intentional. It removes distraction. It focuses the mind. It creates an atmosphere of contemplation, of timelessness, of prayer made audible. The rhythm of Gregorian chant is unlike anything that would come later in Western music. It doesn't march in regular beats. It doesn't have a steady pulse you could tap your foot to. Instead, it follows the natural rhythm of the Latin text being sung, flowing, flexible, speech-like. Some notes are held longer, others pass quickly. The effect is a kind of musical floating, as if the melody exists outside of time altogether. This free rhythm contributes to the meditative quality of the chant. It doesn't push forward aggressively. It simply unfolds. Each phrase rises and falls at its own pace, like breath itself, unhurried and eternal. The melodies are built on something called church modes, ancient scale patterns with names like Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, and Mixolydian. These aren't the major and minor scales we're accustomed to today. They have different arrangements of whole steps and half steps, different tonal centers, different emotional flavors. A melody in Dorian mode feels somehow more austere, more otherworldly than one in a modern major key. The church modes gave Gregorian chant its distinctive sound, familiar enough to feel human, but strange enough to suggest the divine. This was music that deliberately set itself apart from the everyday world. It wasn't meant to sound like anything people heard in the streets or fields. It was meant to sound like heaven. The melodies themselves are carefully constructed to be memorable. They move mostly stepwise, from one note to the adjacent note, rather than leaping around wildly. They tend to stay within a narrow vocal range, usually spanning about an octave. This wasn't just an artistic choice, it was practical. For centuries, these chants were transmitted entirely through oral tradition. Young monks learned them by listening to older monks, absorbing the melodies through repetition, carrying them forward in memory. A melody that jumped erratically would be hard to remember. A melody that flowed smoothly, step by step, would stick in the mind. The musical structure reflected the needs of human memory. These were songs designed to survive without being written down, at least at first, because for a long time they weren't written down. Gregorian chants passed from teacher to student, from generation to generation, existing only in the voices of those who sang them. But memory is fallible. Melodies could change, drift, be forgotten. As the repertoire grew larger and more complex, the need for some kind of written record became urgent. And so, in the 9th and 10th centuries, something revolutionary appeared: neumes. These were the earliest form of musical notation in the Western world. Small marks and squiggles written above the text, indicating the general shape of the melody. A neume rising upward meant the pitch went up. A neume descending meant the pitch went down. They didn't specify exact pitches or rhythms, not at first, but they were enough to jog the memory of someone who already knew the chant. They were reminders, guides, hints, the first steps toward capturing sound on parchment. Monasteries became centers of this new technology. At St. Gall in Switzerland, at Laon in France, at Regensburg in Germany, monks painstakingly copied chant books, covering page after page with Latin text and those curious little marks above the words. These manuscripts are extraordinarily beautiful, illuminated, decorated, crafted with reverence. But their true importance lies in what they represent: the transformation of music from something ephemeral into something fixed. For the first time in the history of Western music, a melody could be written down, preserved exactly, transmitted across distances without change. A chant sung in Rome could be accurately reproduced in England, not through a chain of human memory, but through written symbols. Music was becoming fixed, repeatable, teachable in ways it had never been before. This shift, from memory to writing, is one of the most crucial turning points in the entire history of music. Once notation existed, music could become more complex. composers could experiment, knowing their experiments would be preserved. Performers could learn pieces they had never heard. The collective memory of a community could be externalized, stored in books, protected from the frailties of human forgetfulness. Notation didn't just record music. It changed what music could be. It opened doors to possibility that would lead, eventually, to symphonies, operas, sonatas, to all the intricate structures of Western classical music. And so, here in the quiet scriptoriums of medieval monasteries, we find the true birth of the classical tradition, not in a grand concert hall, not with a famous composer, but with anonymous monks singing in unison, and other monks carefully drawing symbols on parchment. Gregorian chant gave Western music its first unified system, its first notation, its first sense of permanence and control. The music of the cave had been wild, instinctive, communal, but unwritten. The music of the church was disciplined, deliberate, codified. It was music that could be taught, preserved, and passed on with precision. It was music that could be controlled. And from this control, from this order imposed on sound, everything else would grow. The age of Gregorian chant was the age of music becoming something you could hold in your hands, see with your eyes, study and analyze and perfect. The floating, timeless melodies of those monks carried within them the seeds of Bach, of Mozart, of Beethoven. They just didn't know it yet, but the foundation was laid, the tradition had begun, and it all started here, in candlelight and Latin, with a single voice, reaching upward, note by note, into the silence. The centuries pass, and music continues to evolve. We leave behind the floating, timeless world of Gregorian chant and enter an era of motion, of drama, of irresistible forward momentum. The period from roughly 1600 to 1750 is known as the Baroque, a word that originally meant irregular pearl, something beautiful but imperfect, ornate and complex. And the music of this age, it moves, it drives forward with purpose. It has direction, gravity, inevitability. Time itself has entered music, and nothing will ever be the same. The Baroque period represents a fundamental shift in how music is organized and experienced. Where Gregorian chant floated freely without regular pulse, Baroque music establishes strong meter, a steady beat that marches forward, measure after measure, unwavering. You can feel it immediately when you hear Baroque music. There's a motoric rhythm, a sense of perpetual motion, like the gears of a clockwork turning steadily, precisely. This isn't music that exists outside of time. This is music that embodies time, that makes you feel its passage with every beat. It reflects the age that created it, an era of scientific discovery, of mechanical clocks becoming common, of the universe itself being understood as a kind of perfect machine, set in motion and running according to predictable laws. The very building blocks of melody and harmony change during this period. The ancient church modes, those Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian scales, gradually give way to something simpler and, in its own way, more powerful, a major and minor tonality. Instead of 8 different modal flavors, music now organizes itself around just 2 basic types of scales. Major keys sound bright, triumphant, stable. Minor keys sound darker, more melancholic, more troubled. This binary system becomes the foundation of Western music for the next 3 centuries. It's a simplification, yes, but one that proves enormously flexible. Within the major-minor system, composers discover they can create an incredible range of emotion and expression. Modal thinking fades into the background. Tonal thinking takes its place, and the Western ear begins to expect certain things, to anticipate certain patterns of tension and release. One of the most important innovations of the Baroque era is the basso continuo, sometimes called figured bass or just continuo. This is a continuous bass line, usually played by a keyboard instrument like harpsichord or organ, along with a bass instrument like cello or bassoon. The bass line provides a harmonic foundation that runs throughout the entire piece, supporting everything that happens above it. Imagine building a structure. You need a solid foundation beneath it. The basso continuo is that foundation. It gives the music stability, anchors it harmonically, provides a reference point for all the other voices and instruments. Above this steady bass, melodies can soar and interweave, but they always have something to push against, something to return to. The basso continuo creates a sense of harmonic permanence that medieval music never had. And it's not just a simple bass line. The figured bass system uses numbers written below the bass notes, little codes that tell the keyboard player which chords to play. A 6 might mean to play a chord in first inversion. A 7 indicates a 7th chord. These numbers turn harmony into a systematic, codified language. A musician who understands figured bass can look at those numbers and instantly know how to realize the harmony, how to fill in the chords that the composer intends. It's efficient, elegant, and it assumes a high level of musical literacy. The performer becomes a kind of collaborator, interpreting the composer's harmonic blueprint. This system will persist for over a century, becoming the standard way to notate accompaniment in Baroque music. It's another form of control, another way of making music precise and repeatable. But the real revolution of the Baroque period happens in how harmony itself functions. Harmony stops being just a pleasant arrangement of simultaneous sounds and becomes directional. It gains a sense of motion, of going somewhere. Certain chords naturally lead to other chords. The most important of these relationships is the cadence. The way a phrase ends, resolves, comes to rest. The dominant chord, built on the 5th note of the scale, creates tension. And that tension desperately wants to resolve to the tonic chord, built on the 1st note of the scale. This is the VI progression, the fundamental gesture of tonal music. When you hear it, you know the phrase has ended. You feel satisfaction, completion. The music has arrived home. This creates expectation in the listener. We begin to anticipate these resolutions. We feel tension when they're delayed. Music becomes a game of expectation and fulfillment, of questions and answers. Composers also discover modulation, the art of moving from one key to another within a single piece. A composition might start in C major, journey to G major for a while, perhaps touch on A minor, and eventually return to C major. These shifts between keys become structural tools, ways of organizing large-scale musical forms. Modulation creates variety without destroying unity. It allows a piece to explore different tonal regions, different emotional territories, while still maintaining overall coherence. The journey through different keys becomes part of what the piece is about. Not just the melodies and rhythms, but the harmonic itinerary itself. And certain patterns emerge naturally. The circle of fifths, a sequence where each chord's root moves down by a fifth, becomes a common way to drive harmony forward, creating momentum that feels inevitable, mathematically perfect. And then there is Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach, born in 1685, who dies in 1750, right at the end of the Baroque era. Bach doesn't invent these harmonic principles, but he masters them so completely, pushes them so far, that he becomes the culmination of the entire Baroque tradition. He synthesizes everything. the Italian style with its bright melodies and dramatic contrasts, the French style with its elegant dances and ornamentation, the German style with its profound counterpoint and emotional depth. All of these streams flow together in his music. He is not the most famous composer of his time. In fact, he's somewhat old-fashioned by the standards of 1750, still writing in forms that are going out of style. But posterity recognizes what his contemporaries couldn't fully see, that he has brought the Baroque style to its absolute peak. What makes Bach special is how he thinks about harmony and melody simultaneously. For many composers, harmony is a foundation over which you lay melodies. For Bach, counterpoint, the art of combining multiple independent melodic lines, generates the harmony. His melodies don't just sit on top of chords. They interweave with each other, and the chords emerge from their intersection. Listen to a Bach fugue. It begins with a single melodic line, the subject. Then another voice enters with the same subject, while the first voice continues with a new melody. Then a third voice enters, then perhaps a fourth. All these melodies are happening simultaneously, each following its own logic, each making melodic sense on its own. But when you hear them together, they create harmony, rich, complex, inevitable harmony. The chords aren't imposed from outside. They arise from within, from the natural consequence of these independent voices moving through time. Bach's fugues are marvels of this contrapuntal thinking. A fugue is a form where a single musical idea, the subject, is stated, then repeated in different voices, in different keys, woven through the texture in endless variations. It's like watching a single thread being woven into an increasingly complex tapestry. Each entrance of the subject reinforces the main idea, but also propels the music forward into new harmonic territory. Bach uses chromaticism, notes that don't belong to the main key, to intensify emotional tension. He uses suspensions, notes that hang over from one chord into the next, creating dissonance before resolving. These techniques add layers of expressiveness to the mathematical precision of the counterpoint. The music becomes both intellectually rigorous and deeply emotional. It speaks to the mind and the heart simultaneously. One of Bach's most famous works is the Well-Tempered Clavier, a collection of preludes and fugues in all 24 major and minor keys. Why is this significant? Because it proves something that was still controversial in Bach's time, that all keys are usable. The tuning systems of earlier eras made some keys sound beautifully in tune, while others sounded horribly out of tune. But new temperament systems, ways of slightly adjusting the tuning of each note, made it possible to play equally well in any key. Bach's collection demonstrates this. It's both a technical exercise and a work of art. Each prelude and fugue explores the unique character of its key. C major feels different from F sharp major. D minor has a different quality than B flat minor. By cycling through all 24, Bach shows the full spectrum of tonal possibility. He's not just writing music, he's mapping the complete territory of the major-minor system. The Baroque era, and especially Bach's contribution to it, transforms music into something that moves through time with purpose and direction. The floating timelessness of chant is gone. Now music has trajectory. It begins somewhere, journeys through harmonic and melodic territory, and arrives somewhere else. It has shape, architecture, drama. It reflects the scientific worldview of its age, a universe governed by laws, operating like a magnificent machine. The harmony of the spheres, once a mystical concept, becomes something you can almost calculate, map out, predict. Chord progressions follow patterns. Modulations obey rules. Counterpoint moves according to principles that can be taught and learned. Music is still art, still capable of profound emotion, but it's also becoming a kind of science, systematic, orderly, knowable. And this changes everything, because once music has this kind of structure, this sense of forward motion and harmonic logic, it can grow larger. It can support longer forms, more complex developments, greater emotional journeys. The seeds planted in the Baroque era, the major-minor system, functional harmony, systematic notation, directional movement, will bloom into the symphonies and sonatas and operas of the classical and romantic periods. But that story comes later. For now, we rest in the Baroque, in the world of Bach, where harmony has become a machine, beautiful and precise, driving forward like time itself, unstoppable, inevitable, complete. The world shifts again. The year is 1750. Bach has died, and with him, an entire era comes to a close. The ornate complexity of the Baroque begins to feel old-fashioned, overwrought. A new sensibility is emerging, one that values clarity over complexity, reason over decoration, balance over excess. This is the age of enlightenment, and its ideals will reshape not just philosophy and politics, but music itself. We enter now the classical era, a time when music becomes architecture, when form becomes as important as content, when everything finds its proper place. The classical period, running roughly from 1750 to 1820, is deeply influenced by Enlightenment philosophy. Thinkers across Europe are championing reason, order, natural law. They're questioning old authorities, seeking clarity and truth through logical inquiry. This intellectual climate affects every art form, and music is no exception. The dense, intricate counterpoint of Bach begins to feel too complex, too cerebral. Audiences want something more direct, more immediately accessible. They want music that speaks clearly, that doesn't require a university education to appreciate. And so composers begin to simplify, not because they lack skill, but because simplicity, clarity, and elegance become the new ideals. Complexity hasn't disappeared. It's been tamed, refined, made transparent. One of the most visible changes is in musical texture. The Baroque era loved counterpoint, multiple melodic lines weaving together, each equally important. But the classical era shifts toward homophony, a single, clear melody supported by accompaniment. Picture it this way. Instead of several people having equally important conversations at once, you now have one person speaking, while others provide a background of supportive murmurs. The melody stands in the foreground, singing its song, while underneath, the harmony moves in simple, regular patterns, often just chords broken into repeating figures. This makes the music easier to follow. The listener's ear knows where to focus. There's a hierarchy, a clarity of roles. The tune is what you remember, what you hum afterward. The accompaniment provides harmonic context, but it doesn't compete for attention. Phrases themselves become more regular, more symmetrical. The classical style loves balance. A typical phrase might be 4 measures long, followed by an answering phrase of another 4 measures. Question and answer, statement and response. 4 plus 4 equals 8. This symmetry feels natural, almost conversational. It mirrors the structure of language itself, the way we speak in sentences that have beginnings, middles, and ends. When you listen to classical music, you can often predict where phrases will land, where the music will pause to breathe. This predictability isn't boring, it's comforting, elegant. It creates a sense of order, of proportion. Everything is in the right place. the right length. Nothing is excessive or insufficient. Balance, perfect balance. But the real innovation of the classical era is structural. Composers develop what's called sonata form, a way of organizing large movements that becomes the blueprint for countless symphonies, concertos, and chamber works. Sonata form has three main sections. First, the exposition. Here, the composer presents the main musical ideas, usually two contrasting themes, and modulates from the home key to a related key. Then comes the development. The themes are broken apart, transformed, combined in new ways, pushed through various keys, creating tension and drama. Finally, the recapitulation. The themes return, but this time both appear in the home key, creating a sense of resolution and completeness. It's a journey away from home and back again. It's conflict and resolution. It's drama unfolding in purely musical terms, without words, without story, yet somehow you feel the narrative arc. This is revolutionary. For the first time, large-scale instrumental works feel logically organized, structurally coherent, even without text to guide them. You don't need to know Latin. You don't need a program explaining what the music is about. The form itself is the meaning. The journey through keys, the transformation of themes, the return to the beginning. This is what the piece is. Listeners of the classical era learn to follow these forms, to anticipate the recapitulation, to feel satisfaction when the home key returns. Music becomes a kind of abstract architecture that you experience in time rather than space. And just as a beautiful building can be appreciated for its proportions, its symmetry, its elegance, so too can a symphony be appreciated for its formal perfection. The composer who does more than anyone to standardize these forms is Franz Joseph Haydn, born in 1732. Haydn spends most of his career working for the wealthy Esterházy family, essentially running a private orchestra and composing on demand. This gives him a laboratory for experimentation. He writes over 100 symphonies, refining and perfecting the form with each one. He establishes what becomes the standard, a four-movement structure. The first movement is usually fast, in sonata form, establishing drama and energy. The second movement is slow, lyrical, emotional. The third movement is a minuet or scherzo, a dance, providing rhythmic vitality and grace. The fourth movement is fast again, often light and playful, bringing the work to a satisfying conclusion. This four-movement plan becomes so standard that it will persist for generations. Haydn also perfects the string quartet, two violins, viola, and cello, creating a medium for intimate conversational music making among equals. Under Haydn's influence, the orchestra itself becomes standardized and balanced. The Baroque orchestra was variable, whatever players happened to be available, but the classical orchestra settles into a clear structure. A core of strings, pairs of woodwinds, flutes, oboes, clarinets, bassoons. A couple of horns, maybe trumpets and timpani for special emphasis. The result is a balanced sound, with different families of instruments clearly audible, each contributing its own color. The strings provide warmth and unity. The woodwinds add character and solo moments. The brass and timpani provide weight and punctuation. This isn't a random assortment of instruments. It's a carefully designed ensemble, balanced in timbre and power, capable of both delicacy and grandeur. The orchestra becomes an instrument in itself, a kind of super instrument that a composer can play. And then there is Mozart. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, born in 1756, a child prodigy who grows into one of the supreme geniuses of Western music. If Haydn creates the system, Mozart perfects it. He takes the forms that Haydn develops and fills them with music of such beauty, such effortless grace, that they seem not merely constructed but inevitable, as if they've always existed and Mozart simply discovered them. He combines the best of different national styles, the singing, lyrical quality of Italian melody with the structural rigor of German composition. His music has drama, passion, complexity, but it's all contained within forms of flawless elegance. There's never a note too many or too few. Everything is exactly as it should be. Mozart's music is emotionally rich, but the emotions are presented with perfect control. A Mozart slow movement can be heartbreakingly tender, yet it never becomes sentimental or excessive. A Mozart finale can be exuberant and playful, yet it never loses its sense of proportion. This balance between feeling and form is what makes Mozart so remarkable. He's not cold or mathematical, far from it. His music expresses the full range of human emotion, but it does so within the elegant boundaries of classical style. Passion is present, but it's refined, channeled, given perfect shape. It's the emotional equivalent of a perfectly cut diamond, all the fire and brilliance, but held in flawless form. During this era, the piano replaces the harpsichord as the dominant keyboard instrument. This matters enormously. The harpsichord, when you press a key, plucks a string. The volume is essentially the same no matter how hard you press. But the piano uses hammers that strike the strings, and you can control the volume by how forcefully you press the keys. Soft, loud, everything in between. Dynamic control becomes possible. Composers can now write crescendos, diminuendos, sudden accents, delicate whispers. The piano becomes the most versatile instrument of the classical era, capable of both intimacy and power. Mozart writes extensively for piano, exploring its expressive possibilities. His piano concertos in particular showcase the instrument's ability to sing, to converse with the orchestra, to shift from thunderous power to crystalline delicacy in an instant. Music in the classical era becomes conversational, social, intelligible. It's music for the rising middle class, not just for churches and aristocratic courts. Public concerts become common. People gather to hear symphonies, to attend operas, to participate in musical culture. The music itself reflects this social function. It's meant to be understood, appreciated by educated listeners who may not be professional musicians themselves. It has wit, charm, grace. It tells no specific story, yet it communicates clearly. A fast movement conveys energy and joy. A slow movement touches the heart. A dance movement provides rhythmic pleasure. Everything is comprehensible, appreciable, human in scale. This is music that has reached its architectural peak. Every element has its place. Melodies are clear and memorable. Harmonies move logically from point to point. Phrases balance each other symmetrically. Forms provide large-scale coherence. The orchestra is perfectly proportioned. Nothing is out of place, nothing excessive, nothing lacking. It's the musical equivalent of a Greek temple or a perfectly proportioned neoclassical building. Every column the right height, every space the right proportion, everything in harmony with everything else. Order, reason, balance, clarity, the ideals of the Enlightenment made audible. And yet, within this perfection, there's room for infinite variety, Haydn's wit and humor, Mozart's profound emotional depth. Each composer brings their own personality, their own voice, while working within the same basic framework. The forms don't constrain them, they liberate them. Just as a sonnet's strict structure can paradoxically enable a poet to say things they couldn't say otherwise, so too does sonata form enable composers to create drama, tell stories, express emotions with a clarity and power that might be lost in formlessness. Structure isn't the enemy of expression. In the classical era, structure is expression. The form itself means something. The journey from tonic to dominant and back isn't just technical. It's emotional, dramatic, human. The classical era represents a kind of pinnacle, a moment of perfect equilibrium. The chaos of pure emotion has been given shape. The rigidity of pure form has been filled with life. Everything is balanced, clear, reasonable, beautiful. It's a moment of stillness, of perfection. But perfection, by its nature, cannot last. Already, by the end of the 18th century, new forces are stirring. The strictures of classical form will begin to feel confining to some composers. Emotion will demand more space, more freedom. The next era will break open these perfect forms and fill them with storms. But that's a story for another time. For now, we rest in the classical era, in the world of Haydn and Mozart, where music has become architecture, where every phrase is balanced, where every form is perfect, where everything is exactly in its place. But perfection cannot hold forever. The calm, balanced world of the classical era begins to crack. New ideas stir. A younger generation feels constrained by all that order, all that reason, all those perfect symmetries. They want something more passion, more freedom, more individuality. The French Revolution has shaken Europe. Napoleon has risen and fallen. The world feels dangerous, unstable, alive with possibility. And music begins to change again. We enter the Romantic era, where emotion breaks free from architecture, where feeling matters more than form, where the heart speaks louder than the mind. Romanticism, roughly the 19th century, is a movement that touches all the arts. Poets, painters, novelists, and composers alike embrace subjectivity and imagination over reason and order. The Romantics believe that individual feeling is more important than universal rules. They celebrate the irrational, the mysterious, the sublime. They're fascinated by extremes, ecstasy and despair, love and death, the infinite and the intimate. Nature becomes a central metaphor for emotion. A stormy sea reflects inner turmoil. A peaceful meadow suggests tranquility. The natural world isn't just scenery, it's a mirror of the soul. And music, the most abstract of arts, the one that speaks directly to emotion without needing words or images, becomes the romantic art form par excellence. One of the early voices of musical romanticism is Frédéric Chopin. Born in 1810 in Poland, but spending most of his adult life in Paris, Chopin writes almost exclusively for piano, and his music is intimate, personal, meant for the salon rather than the concert hall. He's not interested in grand symphonies or massive orchestras. Instead, he creates miniatures, nocturnes, preludes, mazurkas, waltzes, each one a tiny world of emotion, perfectly distilled. His music is meant to be felt, not analyzed. It speaks of longing, of melancholy, of memories of his homeland, of love and loss. Each piece is like a private confession, whispered in a candlelit room. This is music of the interior life, of moods and atmospheres, of feelings too delicate and complex for words. Chopin's music introduces something called rubato, an Italian word meaning robbed. In rubato, the strict metronomic pulse of classical music loosens. The performer stretches certain notes, hurries others, bending the rhythm to serve expression. Time becomes flexible, elastic, shaped by emotion rather than controlling it. A phrase might slow down as it reaches its peak, lingering there before gently resuming tempo. This creates a sense of spontaneity, as if the music is being improvised in the moment, even though every note is written down. Rubato makes the music breathe, gives it a human quality, frees it from the tyranny of the metronome. It's one more way that romantic music breaks free from classical restraint. Harmonically too, romantic composers push boundaries. They use more and more chromatic notes, pitches outside the main key, creating rich, complex, sometimes ambiguous harmonies. The clear tonal gravity of the classical era begins to weaken. Instead of always knowing where the music is going, you sometimes feel suspended, uncertain. Dissonances last longer before resolving. Modulations happen more frequently, to more distant keys. The music wanders, explores, takes detours. This chromaticism intensifies emotional expression. A chromatic line can sound yearning, searching, never quite satisfied. It can create tension that builds and builds. The harmonic language becomes lusher, more colorful, more emotionally charged, and also less directional, less governed by the strict logic of functional harmony. The forms themselves change. The grand architectures of the classical era, the symphonies, the sonatas, don't disappear, but they're joined by something else. Short character pieces, a nocturne that lasts just 3 minutes, a prelude that captures a single fleeting mood, an etude that's technically a study piece, but is also a complete artistic statement. These miniatures don't need exposition, development, and recapitulation. They simply present a feeling, sustain it, let it resonate, and then fade away. It's a different kind of musical thinking. Not architectural, but impressionistic, capturing a moment, a gesture, an emotion in its pure form. Romantic composers also become interested in national identity. As nationalism rises across Europe, music begins to incorporate folk elements, the rhythms, scales, and melodies of particular regions. Chopin writes mazurkas based on Polish folk dances. Later composers will draw on Russian, Czech, Spanish, Scandinavian traditions. Music becomes a way of expressing cultural identity, of saying, this is who we are, this is where we come from. The universal language of classical music fragments into many voices, each with its own accent, its own character. This enriches the musical palette enormously, bringing new rhythms, new melodic shapes, new colors into the concert hall. As the 19th century progresses, the harmonic language becomes ever more adventurous, ever more chromatic. And then, at the turn of the 20th century, a French composer named Claude Debussy takes the final step. He begins to dissolve functional harmony altogether. Debussy, born in 1862, is influenced by Impressionist painters, by Asian music he hears at the Paris World's Fair, by his own desire to create something new. His music doesn't follow the traditional rules of resolution and progression. Chords don't always resolve the way they're supposed to. Keys become ambiguous. He uses old church modes, whole tone scales, where every interval is the same. Parallel chords that move without functional purpose. The result is music that floats, shimmers, evokes, rather than states. Debussy's music replaces direction with color. A classical or romantic piece is going somewhere, from one key to another, from tension to resolution, from beginning through middle to end. But Debussy's music often seems to exist in a state of perpetual suspension. It's not trying to get anywhere. It's creating an atmosphere, painting with sound. Titles like Reflets dans l'eau, Reflections in the Water, or Nuages, Clouds, tell you what he's after. Not stories, not emotions in the romantic sense, but sensations, impressions, the play of light on water, the movement of mist, the feel of wind. He uses the piano's sustain pedal extensively, letting harmonies blend and blur together, creating a haze of sound. Notes ring together that would clash in traditional harmony, but here they create a kind of shimmering texture, beautiful in its vagueness. Music becomes atmosphere, becomes environment. It's not demanding your attention in the way a Beethoven symphony does, gripping you, shaking you, insisting you follow its dramatic arc. Instead, it surrounds you, envelops you, invites you to drift within it. You can listen closely and discover intricate details, subtle shifts of harmony and color. Or you can let it wash over you, experiencing it as pure sensation. There's no right way to listen. The music simply is, existing in its own timeless space, like light filtering through leaves or water lapping at the shore. And then comes Erik Satie. Born in 1866, Satie is an eccentric, a provocateur, a composer who seems to reject everything that came before. He looks at the late Romantic style, all that emotional excess, all that striving and yearning and grandiosity, and says, no, enough. He strips music down to its bare essentials. His Gymnopédies, written in 1888, are astonishingly simple, slow, gentle melodies over minimal accompaniment. The harmonies are plain, almost modal, ancient sounding. The rhythm is regular, almost hypnotic. There's no development, no drama, no climax. The music simply unfolds, phrase after phrase, calm and unhurried, like someone walking slowly through an empty gallery. Satie even removes some of the standard notation. No bar lines in some pieces, no key signatures. As if he's trying to free the music from the last vestiges of systematic organization. He uses strange, evocative titles and performance instructions. Light as an egg, open your head, on a bridge. Some seem like jokes, perhaps they are. Satie has a sense of humor, a deliberately anti-romantic stance. He refuses to take himself too seriously, refuses to be swept up in grand artistic gestures. His music is modest, understated, almost anonymous. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand anything of you. He even experiments with what he calls furniture music, musique d'ameublement. Music that's meant to be part of the environment, like wallpaper or furniture. Music you're not supposed to pay attention to. He actually performs one such piece at an art gallery opening and becomes frustrated when people stop talking and start listening. That's not the point, he insists. The music should just be there, in the background, creating an atmosphere without demanding focus. It's a radical idea. Music as ambient presence rather than artistic statement. Most musicians of his time are horrified, but decades later this idea will resurface, influencing minimalism, ambient music, even the background music we hear in airports and cafes. Satie also creates a piece called Vexations, a single page of music meant to be played 840 times in a row. Repetition without development, the same phrases over and over, with only the tiniest variations. It takes many hours to perform. It's tedious by design, perhaps a joke, perhaps something else. What happens when music stops trying to go anywhere, when it just repeats, hypnotically, endlessly? Time stretches. Your perception shifts. The music stops being something you follow and becomes something you exist within. Some find it maddening. Others find it meditative, transformative even. Satie is exploring the far edge of what music can be. And so we arrive at a kind of stillness, from the cave flutes playing melody for the first time, through the sacred floating chant of medieval monks, through the mechanical precision and forward drive of the Baroque. through the perfect architectural balance of the classical era, through the passionate outpourings of Romanticism, to this. Music that has stopped trying to go somewhere. Music that simply exists. Debussy's shimmering colours, Satie's gentle, repetitive simplicities. Music as atmosphere, as environment, as presence rather than narrative. This is where our journey rests tonight. Not with a grand climax or a triumphant finale, but with simplicity, with quietness, with music that asks nothing of you, except perhaps to let it be there, softly, in the background of your awareness. The entire history of Western classical music, 40,000 years from those first bone flutes to these gentle piano pieces, has been a journey of increasing complexity, then a gradual dissolution of that complexity, a return to something simpler, more essential. Music began as communal ritual, became sacred meditation, became mathematical machine, became perfect architecture, became emotional expression, became color and atmosphere, and finally, became furniture, became background, became something you don't even need to pay attention to. And perhaps that's the perfect place to end, for now, because when you're falling asleep, you don't want music that demands your attention, that takes you on a journey, that insists you follow its development and anticipate its resolution. You want music that simply exists, that's there with you in the darkness, that asks nothing, that gives you permission to let go, to drift, to stop following, stop analyzing, stop even listening really. Just let it be there. These gentle sounds, these slow chords, these simple melodies that go nowhere and don't need to go anywhere. They're complete as they are, floating in space, like those first chants, timeless, eternal. Just sound, just breath, just music, being, nothing more, nothing less. And perhaps in the morning, if you remember anything at all, you'll remember this, that music is one of humanity's oldest impulses, reaching back to the very beginning of what makes us human, and that in all its forms, from the most complex fugue to the simplest repeated phrase, it has always been doing the same thing, creating patterns in time, organizing sound in ways that speak to something deep within us, something that doesn't need words, doesn't need explanation, something that just is. Rest now. Let the music continue if you wish, or let silence return. Either way, you've traveled through time tonight. 40,000 years in an hour. And perhaps that's journey enough. For now. For tonight. Sleep well.